This is the new Sony 16-35 f4 power zoom lens. Is it worth it? And how does it compare to the Tamron 17-28? That's what we're gonna find out. Hey, my name's Jake and I create content to help solo creators on the go. So I test and review lots of drones, cameras, lenses in places like this in Alaska, and I give you tips and tutorials on how to use them so you can tell better stories. Today we're testing and talking about the Sony Power Zoom 16-35 f4 G lens, which I just bought. And I gotta say, it has been a really fun lens to work with. I'm glad I bought it, but if you already have the Tamron 17-28, it may not be the right lens for you. Okay, I need to back up a little bit. I bought this lens the day it was released, and then I've taken it with me everywhere ever since. So about 2 months I've been using this lens because I wanted to test it in as many different situations and as many different ways as I could before putting this video together. So I've taken this with me to Chicago, I've taken it with me on helicopters, in glacier ice caves, all kinds of things. You're gonna see a ton of photo and video examples shot with this lens. But to start off with, this is 16-35, which is a great focal length for running gun stuff. It's f4. We'll jump into f4 versus f2.8 here in just a second. Overall, I love what Sony is doing with the aperture ring. The fact that you now have the aperture ring and you can select either clicked or declicked aperture right on the lens and be able to do that. I really like that. Now, you can also lock it in A mode and then lock the aperture ring so you don't accidentally change it, and then you control it with your camera. Of course, you also have a zoom forward or toward and wide, and then a programmable button as well as autofocus manual on-off basically switch. Then you've got a zoom ring, so if you like more of the manual feel of a zoom ring, you can still do that, and it's very responsive the way it responds. And then you have a focus ring out here on the very end. So having lots of manual control on this lens is and has been really nice. Now, it's internal zooming, so it'll work great on gimbals. You don't have to worry about changing the weight and balance of your gimbal. And because it's a power zoom, you can put it on a gimbal, and some gimbals will give you the opportunity to be able to control the zoom from the gimbal, so you don't have to touch your camera, and you can get things like a dolly zoom effect, which is actually pretty cool. I don't use it that often, but if it's something you want to do, or if you want to be able to zoom without touching the camera, it actually is very handy to have that. The other thing I love about this switch, being able to push in, pull out, is you can get some really fantastically smooth zooms without having to make sure you're turning the zoom ring very consistently, because this is what would you say, it's sensitive to how far you push it, so you can get a fast or a slow zoom, and it does respond really well. But because this is an f4, I was curious to see how well it would do compared to f2.8. So losing that extra stop of light makes a big difference when you're in places like this, or you're doing astrophotography, things like that. That's where I feel like the Tamron 17-28 still pulls ahead of this lens. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but for now, I mean, this ice cave is pretty epic. The biggest downside of this lens is the f4, which is not bad by any means. I did lots of low light photography when I was down in Chicago and in that area. I've done some low light photography here today in the ice cave, and even now this is pretty low light. So it's not the end of the world, because Sony does do really well at high ISOs, but there are cases where you would want the f2.8 of the either G Master or the Tamron 17-28, which I'll throw up some comparisons here in a little bit between this lens and the 17-28, because they're, you know, similar price bracket, but they're also similar size and similar weight. So while the f4 is limiting in what you can do in low light, especially when it comes to video, it's not as limiting as you might think. It does also limit what you can do for bokeh or out of focus areas, but you can easily correct that, or you can easily change that by making sure you and the camera are closer to the subject, and the background that you kind of want to get rid of is a little further away. But reality is, any wide angle lens, you're not going to get really fantastic bokeh because of just the nature of really wide angle lenses. It does a great job for architecture, or a great job for real estate, anything like that. This would be a fantastic lens for any of those sorts of things, because it keeps the line straight. You don't get a lot of bowing, even all the way wide open at f4, which is what a bunch of these were shot at. You don't get like weird shaped buildings or anything like that. The one caveat is this isn't a tilt shift lens, so you'll have to do some correction in post if you're trying to shoot with the camera at an up angle, say for really tall buildings or a really tall room or anything like that. You'll just have to correct to get those angles straightened out in post in Lightroom, but it's not that big a deal. As far as sharpness goes, this lens is a massive improvement over the old f4 version. I used that lens a few times and I hated it because it just wasn't as sharp as I really wanted it to be, and especially when I got the Tamron, The Tamron was much sharper. This lens really has fixed a lot of those problems. This lens is incredibly sharp, all the way edge to edge, even wide open, and it gets even a little bit sharper as you stop down into the f5.6 range and up. It does really great. Very little distortion. This has been a great photo taking lens. Pretty much most of the photos you've seen, or all the photos you've seen in this video, all the video you've seen in this video, I've shot with either the A7 IV or the Sony Alpha 1, the A1, which is, you know, great 50 megapixel camera. So you're really going to test out what that lens can handle and what it's capable of on a higher resolution sensor like that. And while 16 isn't quite wide enough to do things like inside of the cockpit of a helicopter, for that you really need something more like 10 or 12, just because everything's pretty tight quarters. It is wide enough to do a lot of stuff with, and that is fantastic. But for right now, we're going to jump back in the helicopter and go to another location to get ready for what hopefully is going to be a pretty nice sunset. So the one thing about this lens is that there's no built-in stabilization, no lens-based stabilization. But the nice thing is that with the newer Sony cameras, especially the ones, the last few generations that have active stabilization, and because the lens is so wide, you really can still get plenty usable footage, even if you're running around, let's face it, walking in a place like this. So now that you've seen what the 16 to 35 is capable of, and certainly produces some fantastic results, how's it compare to the Tamron 17 to 28? Of course, one of the big differences between these two lenses is the focal length. You have 17 to 28, which is what you're seeing here. This is 17 on the Tamron, this is 28, and then you have 16 to 35 on the Sony. Now, I'm not counting clear image zoom that Sony does on some of their camera bodies that have the ability to crop in 1.5 times and still keep full resolution 4K, but as you can see here, side by side, the Sony does give you a fair bit wider field of view at 16 millimeters, and you can also punch in quite a bit more at 35 millimeters. Now, couple that with the extra 1.5 times zoom in APS-C mode, and you get actually a very versatile lens with either one of these. But if you're going for the maximum field of view, the Sony definitely wins out on that. And of course, there is the size comparison difference, which here you can see the Tamron's a bit taller. They're about the same distance around, but the Tamron's definitely taller. Now, both of these are internal zooming, so that won't change at all based on zoom, but you do definitely get a little smaller package. Weight-wise, they're about the same, but the smallest package is the Sony for sure. There is a little bit of image quality difference. I feel like the Sony is just a tad sharper and a tad better overall, but again, you get the extra stops of light with this. Now, in these photos, I did stop down to the same. They're both pretty sharp at the same aperture. I think I was shooting at f9 if I remember right, or f4, and they were both very good. But where the Sony really differentiates itself and makes it worth, I think, the few $100 extra if you're not doing lots of nighttime photography or astrophotography, which I've done with the Tamron, and it does and produces spectacular results. But the Sony has all of the physical controls. You can switch manual focus, autofocus on or off. You can declick or click the aperture ring. You can lock the aperture ring. And then you have the control for being able to power zoom as well as the aperture ring, which I love the fact that Sony's putting on aperture rings on all of their lenses now, because it just gives you a much more tactile control over the settings, which I really enjoy. And it frees up one of the dials on your camera to be able to adjust something else or other things if you want to. So to me, both of these lenses are fantastic. They're excellent. It mostly depends on what you're doing with them. If you need more low light performance, the Tamron wins. If you need a lot more versatility in what you can do with it, I feel like the Sony wins a little bit. And for me, this is the lens that I'll be traveling with most of the time now, because it's just simply fantastic. The size, the weight, and what you can do and get out of this lens, even in fairly low light situations, is absolutely excellent. When it comes to flare control, both of these lenses do well with flare control. Definitely not as the higher end glass like the G Master glasses, but they do fairly decently. And when it comes to sun stars, I actually feel like the Tamron wins out a little bit. I can get a little better sun stars than I have been able to get with the 16 to 35. If you want to know some fantastic budget lens options for Sony cameras, you need to watch this video right here. I'll see you over there. As always, if you have questions, ask me in the comments below, or join my live stream Wednesday nights at 4 p.m. Alaska time, 8 p.m. Eastern, when I'm not standing on a glacier. Cheers.